welcome everyone. My name is Sophia. I'm the COO here at Civo, and I'm excited to kick off today's webinar, From Idea to Agent, Building AI Workloads with relaxAI in n8n. Before I introduce today's speaker, I wanted to quickly share a promo that we're running for a limited time only. So Civo is now offering preemptible NVIDIA Blackwell B200 GPUs at just $269 per GPU an hour. These GPUs are currently in short supply globally, and demand is very strong, so this special rate won't last long. These GPUs are a great way to get fast, flexible AI and ML compute for training, inference, and experimentation. If you're interested or have any questions, please feel free to scan that QR code and get in touch with our team members today. Now, on to our webinar. But first, I'd like to introduce our phenomenal speaker. Ben is a founding engineer at relaxAI with experience building machine learning applications across the pharmaceutical and healthcare industries. He now works on relaxAI, the UK's first fully sovereign AI assistant, managing GPU workloads and high-performance inference. He'll start by sharing the story behind relaxAI, then demonstrate how it's used to build a production-ready agentic workflow. So we'll try and set aside some time at the end of today's presentation to answer any questions you may have. So please feel free to throw those in the chat as they come up. But I'm going to go ahead and throw it over to you, Ben.
Thanks, Sophia. Hi, everyone. Yeah, like Sophia said, I'm an AI engineer here working at Civo, but on the relaxAI product. So relaxAI is the UK's first fully sovereign AI assistant that prioritizes the privacy and sovereignty and kind of like protection of your data, right? So today we're going to be kind of like painting a bit of a story of kind of like why we created Relax. We've touched on it a bit. And then we'll be talking about n8n, we'll be talking about AI agents, and we'll actually start to build out kind of a production-ready AI agent from scratch using n8n's agent builder. So first of all, a bit of an agenda. I've talked about this already, but it's going to kind of like split down into three main pillars. The first one is going to be our AI as a service, right? Obviously, that's going to be relaxAI. So like I said, relaxAI is Civo's first sovereign AI assistant that prioritizes the privacy of your data. We leverage some of the most advanced open source large language models out there available at the minute. The next piece of kind of like the story that we're going to paint is the agentic layer. So obviously a lot of you will probably be familiar with kind of agents and agentic AI and kind of like maybe there's a bit of an ambiguous definition and kind of like you're not entirely sure what the importance is, but hopefully we'll be answering all of those questions today. But n8n is basically an open source low code platform for building automated workflows, and that stretches from kind of like general automation to enhance your business processes all the way to some quite sophisticated AI agents. So we'll be kind of like hopefully showcasing a bit of that today. And then to kind of like drive all this, we need a machine learning model, a large language model, and we're going to be using GPT-OSS. So GPT-OSS is probably the most dynamic and flexible model that relaxAI hosts. It's the open weight reasoning model released by OpenAI, and I've chosen it today just because it's really, really fast. So with relaxAI, we've kind of optimized it to run on NVIDIA GPUs, so that it can actually generate over 250 tokens per second. So when it's crunching a lot of tokens like these workflows do, you'll start to really see the benefit of using a really high throughput model. And it's also got really strong agentic functionality, which obviously is going to be really beneficial for us today. So first of all, I kind of want to touch on what some of the key priorities we're seeing here at Civo are for kind of like individuals and enterprises at the minute. And so the first one, obviously, kind of like no surprise, it's a topic of the presentation, but the first one's agentic AI. So agents are definitely dominating the AI space at the minute. And instead of kind of like simple one-shot interactions that a lot of you would be used to using kind of like the traditional user interface with these large language models, you traditionally put in a prompt and you get a response back, and there's a very obvious kind of like human in the loop interaction there. But now actually what we're seeing is that we're seeing a shift away from that, especially kind of like in businesses and enterprises where Now agents are actually expected to solve multi-step, rather complex problems completely unguided by humans. So take, for example, from a coder's perspective, we see that software development is completely revolutionized, right? Whereby traditionally it would be completely orchestrated by humans. Obviously, now we're actually seeing the resurgence of like vibe coded projects, and we've seen vibe coded projects actually reach their way to production, right? So it's completely revolutionized the way software developers work. But say from a business perspective and a business process perspective, we're actually seeing kind of like full end-to-end business processes completely being performed by agentic AI. Hopefully you're going to see one of those today. So the second key priority that we're seeing for both individuals and enterprises is around cost efficiency and predictability. So kind of like just to start to kind of like exemplify the importance of this. So in early 2024, the average token usage across all AI applications as reported by Google was around 9.8 trillion tokens. So again, over all AI applications was around 9.8 trillion tokens. Nowadays, that's actually closer to 1.3 quadrillion tokens. So that's over 130x increase in just under 2 years. So what that means is inevitably businesses are going to start looking elsewhere away from the main players in the AI market for cheaper alternatives. I think what we're seeing definitely here at relaxAI and Civo is because the parity and kind of like the difference between the open source AI community and the closed source community is forever shrinking. We're actually seeing businesses turn away from the main players in the AI space, the hyperscalers like OpenAI and Claude, and looking to this kind of like more democratized AI approach where people are looking to smaller AI vendors who are actually hosting some really, really powerful models, but they're hosting them at a fraction of the price. So we're completely seeing a revolution, the AI space revolutionize, and kind of like the attention coming away from the main players in the space over the past few years. So the third big priority is around observability. I think this was always a hot topic in the AI space anyway, because people were kind of like so-called concerned about black box thinking and things like that. But observability is key now that LLMs and agents are becoming kind of like decision makers in heavily regulated industries. So we're seeing kind of like agents make decisions in pharmaceuticals from my experience, or healthcare, or finance. And therefore these kind of reasoning models that print out their like chain of thoughts are becoming really, really powerful for kind of like justifying AI's actions, right? And if you kind of like sign up to relaxAI at the end of this presentation, start to use some of the reasoning models that we have, you can see a really kind of like thoughtful approach from some of these agents. And hopefully you're going to see that in action today. And the final kind of priority that we're seeing for both individuals and enterprises around sovereignty and privacy, and it's the main aspect that I'm going to be talking about today when I come on to relaxAI. So 100% we're seeing organizations becoming very cautious about where they're putting their data, especially around AI. And I think that comes as a consequence of kind of numerous malpractice from these AI hyperscalers. So it won't be completely arduous task to research some of the poor practices that people like ChatGPT have done about people's data, the lack of compliance with like GDPR, and also things like distributing people's data internationally around data centers around the world means that people who are in the UK are no longer like subject to only UK sovereign law, right? So what we're seeing in the UK especially is a big shift moving away from the big players of the US and actually realizing the importance of local data control, where when you put your data into an LLM, it goes to a data center that's only in the UK, say London. It's encrypted on rest, it's stored locally on the GPU, and it never leaves that. And it never leaves UK borders, right? So it's only ever subject to UK sovereign law. And especially in heavily regulated industries, that is a primary concern for a lot of our users. So that kind of painted the picture of why we created relaxAI here at Civo. Things like sovereignty and observability, things like very kind of like transparent and predictable pricing, and also very, very strong open source models, were all reasons of why we created this AI application, right? So relaxAI is the UK's first fully sovereign AI assistant that gives users the peace of mind that they know where the data is going. It hosts open source models. The models are running in UK data centers only that Civo own. So when you put your data into the large language model, you could be confident it's not leaving there and it's not going to the US and it's not going to be subject to any other country's sovereign law. With regards to performance, we can say it's near ChatGPT performance. We're hosting some really advanced large language models at the minute, models like GLM 4.6, models like GPT-OSS that we're going to be using today are actually almost comparable with some of the rather expensive models that are out there in the closed source community. We offer really predictable pricing at a fraction of the cost of the big players like ChatGPT. And there's also just strong things like agentic functionality, which is a key concern, obviously, if you come to this talk and you've worked with agents before. Strong reasoning, so understanding the model's chain of thought, things like sentiment analysis, and obviously for things like vibe coding projects, code generation. So you can plug relaxAI into your IDE of choice and get really productive quite quickly. So some of the key components about relaxAI that I want to go through before we kind of like jump into how it's going to integrate with n8n and how it's going to be used to design our agent. So I've split it into kind of like 4 pillars. The first one being kind of the models that we host. I've touched on this already, but it's backed by some of the most advanced open source large language models to date. Models like Llama and models like GLM 4.6 are really starting to close the gap between open source and closed source. And on the benchmarks, you're not seeing that much of a difference in terms of performance. So I've got a bit of a breakdown there, like Maverick is a multimodal model, meaning it supports text and image input. So if you're doing like image analysis, etc., that would be the model for you. We've got GLM 4.6, which is an advanced reasoning model. Clearly demonstrates its chain of thought, clearly goes through these kind of like self-corrective loops that you would expect from agentic AI, where kind of it goes down one channel and explodes there. It kind of cuts off that channel and might explore another. Really powerful kind of like logical deduction that we're seeing in these advanced LLMs now. And it also hosts GPT-OSS. So like I said at the start, really strong agentic functionality and rapid responses over 250 tokens per second. The second aspect that you would expect from a lot of these AI applications is a user interface. So our user interface has a really clear layout and design. It's really easy to navigate around, and it's really easy to just get up and running and productive as soon as possible. It offers some key functionality that we're quite happy with, especially on the benchmarks. We're actually quicker and better than ChatGPT with things like deep research. So deep research allows you to perform PhD level analysis into any domain of your choice, whether that's scientific or kind of like you're doing a competitor analysis, for example. You can create a really comprehensive, well-researched report in around 5 minutes. And file upload. So if you were kind of, say, doing document summarization and you wanted to do that across, say, 8-10 documents, we offer the ability to upload parallelized documents, and the model can churn quite a lot of tokens in that process. If the user interface isn't for you and you want an API to kind of integrate into your code base and drive some, say, an agentic workflow, we have a really flexible and reliable API that has clear documentation that I can share at the end. The API was designed in a way to be one-to-one compatible with OpenAI, right? And we designed it that way such that the migration process away from providers like ChatGPT is as seamless as possible. So say you're using kind of like, you want to migrate your Python packages away from using OpenAI and you want to move to relaxAI. It's simply a 2-line code change where you put your new API key in, you change your base URL to point to relaxAI, and you can be up and running straight away. So it's simply change your client and it works in exactly the same way. And also, if you don't want to use the OpenAI packages, we offer a range of SDKs in Python, TypeScript, Golang, So a range of programming languages there if you want to use the relaxAI packages yourself. And finally, where kind of like a lot of the power actually comes from is the way that relaxAI plugs into over 30 third-party integrations. So obviously we're going to be exploring one today. We're going to be exploring n8n, which is a drag and drop workflow automation tool and supports a lot of agentic functionality. But it doesn't stop there. It's not just drag and drop workflows. It extends all the way to things like autonomous coding agents. So you can plug relaxAI into your IDE and it can kind of like ingest your code base. It can debug, it can plan, it can architect, and it can write code for you. So a lot of options there. So I've covered a bit about relaxAI and like why we made it, what the story of it was, and kind of like what caused us to kind of like create the application and what change we're trying to make. So I want to briefly touch on what n8n is if a lot of you don't know. So like I said, n8n is simply a drag and drop automation tool. It allows you to kind of like connect nodes on a canvas, and it's really easy to get set up and running, kind of automating. You can scale the automation, you can add AI into the automation to kind of like introduce an agent. But it allows you to automate business processes without limits, really. I think this quote sums it up really well, where it says, n8n is simple enough to ship in hours, but sophisticated enough to scale. n8n lets you automate business processes without limits to your logic. And you're going to see that, right? It's really easy for people who are non-coders or kind of low coders to get really productive quite quickly using tools like n8n. And I think that's really topical. I've got a quote here from Satya Nadella. Obviously, this is quite a bold quote where agents will replace all of software. Whether you think that's true, whether you think kind of like vibe coded projects are going to make their way to production and become the primary source of code, I think you have to kind of like acknowledge that agents are definitely revolutionizing the way we develop software at the minute and definitely need to be taken seriously. So there's two options to spin up n8n. You can go straight to n8n, Google it, and you can go straight to the website. Or if you want an n8n application that's completely self-hosted and it's running on UK sovereign Kubernetes nodes, i.e. Civo's infrastructure, if you click this link, I'm sure we'll share the slides after this webinar. But if you click the link, it'll take you to a Git repository where just a few commands of Terraform, you can get up and running with a self-hosted n8n application, and you can start to benefit from things like MCP servers and community nodes and a lot more kind of like customization that you wouldn't get with the cloud subscription. So kind of like two options for you there. But onto what we're going to be building today. Today, I'm going to guide you guys through kind of I'm calling it a relaxAI lead agent, but essentially it's going to be a sales lead agent. So a quick kind of like high level overview of what it is before we go and start and build it on the n8n canvas. So I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with kind of a interest registration form on a website, right? So you'd go to the website, say it's relaxAI. I'm going to be trying to do this for relaxAI today. And you might put in your first name and last name and your email address, right? And then traditionally you'd get a sales outreach email from the person who it goes to, whether that's the sales department or the engineering team or whatever, asking for like a call to action, asking to book in with a call. I'm sure everyone's got that, right? But I think the arduous part of that for companies, and especially sales department, is the process would usually look like this, right? So you'd submit your form, you put in your first name and last name and your email. That form would traditionally go to, say, the sales department. They'd review that kind of like information. They'd do some research on that person, try and find them on sources like LinkedIn, and try and do a quick Google of kind of who they are. Then using their experience and the information that they gathered, they might decide, is the person a hot lead or a cool lead or a warm lead? Basically, a hot lead being, we need to get in touch with this guy straight away, put in a call with them. They're a strong, influential decision maker at the company. They're like really high level of seniority. They have a lot of experience. They have a lot of budget. The company's really established. Things like that would dictate whether the person thinks it's a hot lead or not. Then what the sales department might do is write a really individualized and kind of like personalized email to the person who submitted the interest form saying, this is our product, this is why I think it'd be suitable for you. I know you've got these key experiences, please book in a call. And then the tone of the email will be dictated by whether the person thinks it's a cool lead or a warm lead or a hot lead, right? And I guess the question that we're going to try and answer today is, can we completely take the human out of that process? And can we completely replace that process with an agent? So the process that we're going to follow today is I'm going to parse the individual information out of the interest form from the website. It's going to be like first name, last name, and email. And then I'm going to enrich that profile with a service called Apollo. So Apollo is kind of a platform with over 1 million professional profiles. So say for someone like me, I've just put in like in the interest form, say Ben Norris and email address. So not a lot of information, but with that information, I can use Apollo to pull information about things like my career history, things like key skills, things like years of experience, really comprehensive information about the company that I work for, and kind of a lot of information to build up kind of this picture that the agent can use to generate a sales outreach email, right? Then with that really comprehensive profile that we put together, we're going to use relaxAI. So relaxAI is going to do a few things. It's first of all going to give the lead a score from 0 to 100, where 0 would be really cold lead, i.e. doesn't have a lot of like experience, doesn't have a lot of budget, doesn't have a lot of applicable skills to our products. But my product in this case is going to be relaxAI that I'm going to try and sell. Or a hot lead being 100 would be, like I said, high level of seniority, decision maker at the company, really applicable tech stack at the company, really applicable key skills that I've pulled down, a lot of experience in the field, etc. And then Relax is going to create a highly individualized and personalized email that is going to be different depending on how hot the lead is. And then we're going to send that email off to the end user. So it's going to be quite a few steps. And I'm going to show the power of completely replacing the human input with an AI agent. So I guess that's where I'll stop the initial introduction presentation. And if we can flick over to the screen share, I think you guys can see. Just give me, yeah. Cool. Okay, so I'll carry on because I think everyone can see. But like I said, I mapped out the process from the start. If you don't know what I mean by an interest form, you can see one on the Civo website here, right? So it's like, scroll down, it reached out to the sales team and you just put in your first name, last name, email, maybe a job title and a phone number, but not a lot of information that we can work with to write a really, really customized and individualized email, right? But we're going to be using n8n for that. So first of all, this is the landing page of n8n, right? So when you go, it's really clear layout and easy to follow. In n8n, you have workflows. Workflows are just the drag and drop canvas that you can start to piece together nodes, such that you can, you start to piece together nodes such that you can create really comprehensive AI workflows. So all I'm going to do is create a new workflow, right? And you'll get something like this, which is just a completely blank canvas. But the first thing that we want to do is create an initial entry point for our workflow, right? So the workflow has to be triggered by something, otherwise it's not agentic. It's not completely autonomous and self-guided, and it requires me to actually trigger it. So we're going to introduce a webhook. Now, if you don't know what a webhook is, all that a webhook is when you put in your information and you click submit on the form, under the hood, it's going to trigger a webhook, right? And the webhook would initially be kind of like linked to, say, the company's database, or it might be like linked to kind of an Excel sheet on the back end, whatever it is, it's just a way of saving the information. Now, in our case, we're going to create a webhook that triggers our workflow with the information that the user puts in the sales interest form. So in n8n, I can have a webhook node. and I can just start to add that in. Now, instead of watching me just configure nodes, I've got nodes ready to go on my other screen. So I'm just going to try and copy them in just to kind of like make it a bit clearer. And so this is a webhook node, right? You've got an endpoint. The endpoint is what is triggered under the hood of the sales interest form, right? So that's completely customizable. I'm just using the test URL just because it's demo purposes. We're going to do a post request because we're actually posting that information about first name, last name, and email. And you've got a path, again, that's completely customizable. It's just going to dictate what your URL looks like. But I'm just going to keep it as that for now. And again, because it's test purposes, I'm just going to keep this as no authentication. So again, this is our entry point to our workflow, and we're just going to get data into our canvas so we can actually start to work with it. So if I listen for some test events now, you can see n8n is listening for a post request. So you need someone to come along and submit the form and click submit and start to send in your, like, their name and email, right? And the way I would do that is to do something like this, where if this looks intimidating, it's not. It's basically just sending this information, which is Ben Norris at Civo, and the company that I work for, right? So if I click enter now, you can see the workflow has started. And if I close that, you can see the initial entry point to our workflow has succeeded, and I've got the key information about the individual, i.e. me, who is going to be like the dummy for this exercise. So that's the first node. Obviously, that doesn't give us a lot of information, right? I can't conduct a research task with this information. I'm going to need a bit more information, a bit more details about who this person is, and a bit more information about the career experience and who they are. So that's where I'm going to use Apollo. Now, Apollo is, like I said, a platform with millions of professional profiles about individuals. And you can basically call the Apollo API to pull down specific information about someone's email address, right? So all that we need to do is send an API request, put in the email address, and I can start to build out a really comprehensive profile. So to do that, I'm going to attach an HTTP request node, right? That basically means I'm going to make an API request, and it's going to look something like this. Now, again, all I'm going to do is copy it in, and I'm going to attach it like that. Now, the input to this node is going to be the output of the previous node, which is just this very low-level piece of information. I'm going to do a post request. So I'm going to post a request to the Apollo API. I'm going to do it to this API endpoint, which is a very well-documented API endpoint in the Apollo API. It's basically just saying match the people that fit this criteria. Now, this is the first API request that we made in n8n. And to do an API request, we actually need a header auth or an authentication key. And luckily, the way you set that up in n8n is by defining credentials, right? So first of all, you need to create a credential in n8n. So if I go to header auth and click create credential, it's going to come up something like this. So I need a name and a value. The name is just any name. It can just be like Apollo or Apollo API key. And the value is going to be the value of the API key that I get, right? So how do we get that from Apollo? What we do, we go to the Apollo website and we go to the developer settings of Apollo. So developer.apollo.io.keys. I go to, you can see I've already created an API key here that I'm currently using. But just to show you, you go to create a new API key. You can call it what you want. You can give it any description you want. You can give it any accesses that you want. So the endpoint that I'm going to be using is this today. But if you'd like, you can give it every endpoint. It's up to you. You can also set it as the master key if you want, which I have just because it's a demo. But like I said, I've already created an API key for this case. So I've just copied that across, go back to my workflow, and I'd paste it in here, right? Now, I've already created the n8n credential. You'd paste it, you'd hit save, and you'd be up and running. Now I'm just going to close this down just because I've already created it. And the last thing is it needs a value to work with. So we need to give Apollo API like an email or a name to actually pull these profiles down. So I'm going to give it my email because that's unique. It's just saying email is Ben Norris, send a request to the Apollo database and pull down the profile that you got about this person. So I'm going to execute that. And you can see already that it's pulled down a lot more information than what we had initially, right? So it's got things like my LinkedIn URL. Obviously, it's got a lot of garbage, but we'll get on to filtering that out. It's got things like my career experience, so like employment history, works at Civo, works at Bupa, works at AstraZeneca, Kubrick, BAE Systems, etc. So really comprehensive amount of information about me. If you scroll down a bit more, it's got things like the keywords that I'm used to working with. So Kubernetes, machine learning, Talos, all applicable. The number of people in my company, the industry that I work at, loads of information here. It goes on for ages. Also a lot of garbage that we don't really want and we want to kind of like filter out, right? So that's going to lead into our next node. So just to recap, we've submitted the interest form, and we've used the information, i.e. the email and the interest form, to enrich it with Apollo to create a really comprehensive profile about the individual that submitted interest, right? And now we need to merge those pieces of information together, and we need to kind of like get rid of all the rubbish, because I'm not interested in all like the null values, like my Twitter profile and stuff. Not interested. So I'm going to add in another node, which is going to be an edit fields node. So all the edit field node does is allow you to manipulate the profile that you got, the kind of like data set that you got. Start to drop values. It allows you to merge values together, etc. So you'll see that in action. So I'll paste that in. I'll join the dots. Now this looks a bit more kind of like not intimidating, but values like this look initially like, how do I know what to put in here? Don't worry, you don't need to know any of this language. n8n makes it really easy to drag and drop them in, but just to cover what I'm passing out. So the input is this really kind of like comprehensive but messy data source that I've got about the individual. Now I need to pass out the key fields that I want, which is a lot, right? So I've got like email, company, I've got headline, job title, I've got things like city that I work in. If I scroll down a bit more, I've got a company description. I've got somewhere like the key skills, tech stack that I've used. That's going to be really, really important. Company keywords, really important. Now, if I execute the step now, you can see that's really messy. I've got like things like photo URL that's not going to be useful. That might like not confuse the LLM, but if you give it kind of duff information, you're one, consuming the context, and two, more prone to kind of like incorrect results. So got some really clean data here about the individual, right? Now, I said this may seem a little bit more intimidating. I promise you it's not. So if I get rid of something like the email field, find the email somewhere. Maybe that's a bad example. Okay, maybe that's a bad example, but all you need to do to kind of like populate these fields is drag and drop them into the boxes, right? So if I want the name, I'd pick it up, I'd drag it in, and that's all I need to do, and it'd populate the code there in front of you. Or if I wanted anything else, things like organization name, I'd drag it in and I'd drag it into the box. But that's done. And basically, to recap, now we've got a really comprehensive data set or profile about the individual. And that's all we need to do from kind of a data processing perspective, data engineering perspective. We can now feed that directly into our agent, which is kind of the beef of the exercise, right? So the next step is to create the agent node. You might remember in the presentation, we designed relaxAI to be one-to-one compatible with the OpenAI API specifications. And we did it exactly for reasons like this, right? It's because we can start to utilize some of these nodes like the OpenAI node. and we can be like messenger model, right? I'm just going to copy in from the screen. But the only thing that we need to do to get productive with this node with relaxAI is just set up a specific credential for Relax. And then the OpenAI node will start to list the Relax models, and we can start to send tokens to the Relax models. So again, if you remember, we created an n8n credential with our Apollo API. This time we're going to create a bit of a different credential because this time we actually need an API key and we need a base URL. And I'm going to show you how to generate that and pull that from the relaxAI dashboard, right? So we need to update the API key, and we also need to update the base URL because currently it's pointing in OpenAI. So to get your API key from the Relax dashboard, I'd go to, first of all, the dashboard, so like hello, relaxAI will respond. But if you go to settings and you go to API keys, you can very easily create a an API key. I'm just going to call it webinar that you can copy, and you can simply just paste that into your n8n credentials, right? So I've got my API key. It took me a few seconds to create. And the second thing that I need to change is the base URL. So in this case, it's going to be, it's not going to be OpenAI, it's going to be relax.ai. So it's going to be api.relax.ai. And that's the only change that you need to make, just a 2-line code change. But again, I've already got that credential set up. So I'm going to connect with my relaxAI account. I'm going to do resource text because we're just sending messages to a text model, GPT-OSS, operation messenger model. And now I can select the model that I want, which, like I said, is GPT-OSS. But if you wanted to use any other model, you can see in the drop-down all the models that relaxAI supports, right? So you might want to use a GLM 4.6 for really kind of like comprehensive reasoning tasks, and that would be better suited for you. Or you might want to use a llama because you might be processing images, whatever fits your use case. Now, this is where the bulk of instructing the agent how to behave is kind of done. So a lot of you are familiar with system prompts and user prompts. So just to go over it, system prompts is kind of the general high-level instructions that you give to the agent that dictates how you want the agent to behave. So it's general instructions that across every interaction, this is how I want you to behave, and this is what I want you to do, right? So not specific, but kind of high-level general instructions. So I'm saying to relaxAI here, you're a sales representative at relaxAI company, a UK-based sovereign AI assistant, and your task is basically threefold. So first of all, I want you to score the lead based on the criteria below, and I'm going to give some scoring criteria down here. But I basically want you to score the lead, which is me, from 0 to 100, and then determine their tier, the tier being hot lead, warm lead, cool lead, or cold lead. And then I want you to write a really personalized email appropriate for their specific tier. So I've got some scoring criteria here where I've said things like company size are going to be quite important for dictating how hot the lead is, right? So if the company is like very small, you might give it like a 10 points, but if the company is really large, you might give it 20 points, right? So obviously large companies, a lot of budget, that would dictate kind of the scoring criteria. Then you've got like industry fit, which is obviously really important, where if it's tech or SaaS, they're obviously going to be applicable for relaxAI. So give it a bit more points than say another industry. You've got the tier threshold. So I'm saying between 80 and 100 is hot, all the way to cold, which is between 0 and 39. And you've got kind of like general instructions. So if it's a hot lead, that means it's urgent. Booking a call this week, really urgent call to action, and kind of send a more kind of like forthright email to them. Then you've got a bit more about the email requirements that I want to send to this lead, right? So first of all, kind of like hot lead, I want it to be 300 words. I want it to be confident and direct. I want it to reference their level of seniority at the company, their comprehensive career history, tech stack, funding, all really important parts for a hot lead, right? Clear call to action, end it with a specific question, be really direct and kind of like be really clear that it's quite an urgent lead, all the way down to say cold lead, which is saying thanks for your registration, just generally leave the door open. Then in the system prompts, I've got more information about what I want the email to include. Again, these are quite general, right? So include their name, the job title, the company, obviously because we've got all that in our profile. And then things like tone, things like words and phrases to exclude, etc. And then in the user prompt here, that's going to be specific to that individual, right? So score this lead, I write a personalized email based on their tier. Remember, I've put all the instructions in the system prompts, but this is the person, right? The name, Ben Norris, emails, ben.norris@civo.com. And you can start to scroll down to get like employment history that we're giving the agent, we're giving company information to it, giving financial status, tech stack, company keywords, form submission. The agent has a lot of information to go on and start to generate this email now. And now I'm saying respond with JSON, give the score as your output. So like what the agent rates me. Give the tier, give a brief summary of who the individual is, and then give the subject and body of the email that we're going to get the agent to send at the end of this workflow, right? So if I click execute step, you see that kind of like took a few seconds because there's a lot of tokens being put through GPT-OSS at this point. And it's come back and said, I'm a warm lead. It's given me a score of 60 out of 100. And it said all the right things about my career experience. So 6 years experience across DevOps, machine learning companies, AstraZeneca, Bupa, and BA systems. That's all correct. And then you can start to see it delves deeper into like individual traits and skills and kind of like experiences that I have, right? So talks about kind of like your hands-on experience with Kubernetes, GPU workloads, and broader tech stack. It then calls out specifically information about relaxAI down here. It calls out specific information about the company that I work at. And then it gives kind of like a nice kind of like warm, because obviously I'm warm lead. Whenever you feel ready, I'd be happy to arrange a brief walkthrough tailored to your team's workflow. So a kind of like soft call to action there, right? But again, that's really, really tailored to the individual and really specific. And if I'm reading that, I'm thinking someone's done like a bit of research about me. The next step is just some kind of like data manipulation exercises. So remember, we added in an edit fields node here. I'm just going to do a similar thing and parse out the key information that we need to then send that email, right? So I'm just going to parse out the email, the subject title of the email, and the body of the email. Remember, this is the input. It's the output of our previous node and the input into the current node. If I execute that step now, it's just making a little bit nicer and only giving the information that we need. The penultimate step is going to be a Gmail node. So I'm going to use Gmail to send an email automatically to the end user. So if I type in Gmail and I go send a message, it's going to give me something that looks like this. Now, it probably won't be much of a surprise to you that you need to create another credential for your Gmail account because it's a completely separate service. And you'll be familiar with going to create a new credential. Now, creating a Gmail account credential is really easy because we can use OAuth 2, which makes you basically click the sign in with Google button. There's going to be a pop-up for your email address and password. And then you basically give Google or n8n access to your inbox. You can filter permissions there to make it a bit more stringent. If you only want to send messages, you can. But you basically click the button and give it access to your Gmail. Now I'm going to close that down because I've already got the credential. Resource message, operation send, because we send an email. And then this is all the information that you'd usually put in an email that you write manually, right? So you put to ben.norris@civo.com, subject, and the message that we're going to send. Now, if I execute step, give it a few seconds, we can see that succeeded. My phone's just buzzed, so I've got an email to show you the kind of email that we'd be getting. This has just come through just now. 0 minutes ago, and it's gone, I'm impressed with the breadth of your engineering journey, etc. And then a bunch of information that's applicable to me. Now, obviously, you can customize this however you want. This is just how I wanted the email to send, right? Now, the last step is, suppose you want all of this information that you've gathered about this individual to be stored somewhere, either a database or an Excel document or a Google Sheets document. So that's really easy. We can make use of all the information that we've gathered through all this nodes and the information that the agent has generated for us in a Google Sheets node. So the Google Sheets node comes as no surprise, just saves the information in a Google Sheets document, which again, I'll copy it in. Not that. Connect the dots. Again, I won't go through it, but you need to create a credential. It's going to work in exactly the same way as your Gmail account. You just go authenticate with OAuth 2, open your Google account and give it access. I've given it access to all these documents, so you can see in the dropdown, I'm going to use this lead data. Give it sheet 1, doesn't matter. Map each column manually because we've given it the values to send. And now if I execute the step, you can see this is all the information that we're going to save in the Excel or Google Sheets document, in which if I open this now, because I've tested this a few times beforehand, but you can see name, email, company, job title, the score that has been given to it, 60, warm lead, subject to the email, and the body of the email, right? Now, obviously, I've manually triggered all these nodes, right, just for demo purposes. And I think the point that I'm trying to create here, right, is now that all of the nodes are in place, we can actually leave these entry point nodes open. So you can hook it into the back end of your interest form on your website. You can make it kind of like wait for trigger events all the time. And now if I trigger another event, obviously I'm just going to put in my profile anyway because I don't want to spam people with emails. But you can see each node is autonomously just triggering by itself, and I've not touched anything, right? All I've done is click submit on the sales interest form. It sent an email to my phone because it's just buzzed again. It saved the information to the Google Sheets. And again, you've got another completely new email that's been sent to me, obviously. And highly individualized, completely unique. And it means, obviously, this scales really well, whereby if you had, say, 10 new people come to your website and input their information, traditionally that would go to a CRM system and would require kind of like 10x the work for a human to perform these tasks and research, send an outreach email. Now that there's no limits to the scale of this, right? You can execute this as many times as you want, and you've completely taken the human out of the loop, and you've left the door open to the agent kind of completely self-guiding and outreaching to your clients. So that is kind of it, I think. I'll share the slides after, and in the slides, at the final slide, there's actually a link to this workflow where if you click the URL, there's it'll take you to a JSON file. Once you have that JSON file, you just need to save it locally, and then you can actually go to n8n and you can import from file, and then you will have the exact workflow that I've just put together right now. You'll just need to set up your credentials, so things like your relaxAI API key, your Google account and your Google Sheets account, and obviously the Apollo, and then you'll be up and running straight away. Also on the final slide is some QR codes, which will link directly to, first of all, the sign up page for relaxAI. Sign up, you can get free interactions every day if you want to test it out, and you can test out a few of our models with this n8n workflow. And there'll also be a link to the API documentation as well. So you can explore what the API has to offer. But yeah, I will, I guess, hand it back to Sophia. And I think there's questions, right?
There are. So just one quick one that I see that came through. Is this recording going to be available after today? Yes. We will have that available for you shortly. And then we had a number of questions that came through during sign up. We asked people if they have any questions. So I'm going to just go through those really quick, Ben, and I'll pull them up on the screen so you can see them. But the first one is, how do you ensure high availability for relaxAI services?
Yeah, really good question. Obviously, that's a concern with, it's quite topical, right? So in the past few months, we've seen quite a few of the kind of like main AI vendors be subject to things like Cloudflare outages. We've seen quite a lot of downtime with the ChatGPTs and the Anthropics and like Geminis, etc. So here at relaxAI, we have some really sophisticated and oftentimes proprietary observability and monitoring. So we have a lot of kind of like tools in our stack to monitor kind of like traffic influxes, networking blips, like certain metrics about the LLM that would require us to like scale up and down, etc. And also we have some very sophisticated auto scaling. We've got to be releasing another iteration of our GPU infrastructure, which basically means more high availability, auto scaling, faster model load time, etc. So we have a lot of kind of things in our stack to ensure the models are already up. And if you kind of like look at our uptime, we're actually quite proud of how often the GPU workloads are up and live, and that's because we have like very sophisticated monitoring and observability.
Amazing, thank you. The next one, if you want to move from prototype AI agents to production quickly, what should I do first to avoid re-architecture later, especially when using n8n and locally hosted LLMs?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think like I touched on it a few times with the advantage that I see with n8n, right? In that it scales really well. I think it scales really well because tools like n8n or any kind of like AI agent automation workflow tool should be considered like primarily as an orchestration layer, where it's kind of orchestrating integrations, right? And the point that I'm trying to make is it should be really lean. And you can see in my workflow that I've not got any like core business logic in my workflow. In fact, all I'm doing in each node is just calling external services, whether that's Apollo, whether that's relaxAI, whether that's Gmail. And it's not like I've wrote a specific Python package to kind of like conduct any of those tasks, right? So the point that I'm trying to make is if you are scaling some of these workflows, especially in n8n, you should intentionally keep them really lean and really streamlined and consider them only as an orchestration layer and not your core tool that is driving your business logic.
Thank you. Next one. What is the difference between agents built using n8n versus framework like LandGraph, CrewAI, and what to prefer when?
Yeah, I mean, I think it kind of extends what I just mentioned. So n8n is designed to be kind of like really simple entry point, designed for like no to load coders. It's a canvas, and obviously it's really easy to get up and running with. The documentation as well, you can import workflows, and as long as you substitute in your credentials, you can be really productive really quickly. But it is just kind of an orchestration layer, meaning you're orchestrating integrations and services, whereas LangGraph is more core to your agent, right? It's kind of like imported to the package that you put together. You can put together really sophisticated graphs and networks, like self-corrective loops, etc. But it's more core to kind of like your kind of like stack, essentially. So it might be a Python package that you import. It might plug directly into your code base, etc., which is obviously very different to n8n, and they both kind of like fulfill two different purposes.
Perfect, thank you. For the next one, we've had quite a few questions around sovereignty. So this one's around how do you protect sovereign data and what security guarantees are offered?
Yeah, good question. I think I touched on that a little bit on my slides, but just to go over it again, I think it kind of like comes into why we built relaxAI. So like I said, relaxAI is a suite of large language models that run on GPUs that Civo own. Civo own them, and the GPUs run in UK data centers, so in London. And the advantage of having the LLMs running locally on UK soil is when you put your data in, first of all, it's encrypted in rest, so we never keep the data is always opaque. We never keep your data, but it's also stored only on GPUs, primarily through the inference engine, but it only goes to GPUs that are on UK soil. So that means it's only subject to UK sovereign law. And I take in contrast some of the hyperscalers that have kind of this like follow the sun model, meaning they oftentimes have an international web of data centers where they're all hosting inference engines, and you could put your data into ChatGPT and it could go anywhere. It could go to any other country that is not the UK, right? And oftentimes the data is sharded up, it's distributed around the world, and you've lost traceability of what sovereign law that data is subject to. So the promise that we can make at relaxAI is the models are only running on Civo infrastructure, which is UK sovereign kind of infrastructure that runs in the data centers that Civo owns and manages. So there's a lot of advantages around sovereign law there.
Awesome, thank you. So I've got about 3 questions left. We're gonna try and get through all of them before top of the hour. If GPUs are rented hourly, how do you ensure fixed costs for high resource users?
Yeah, good question. I think when you register for, first of all, kind of like you wouldn't be managing that with relaxAI, right? So if that's a question about relaxAI, maybe you got the wrong gist, because relaxAI is an AI as a service where the GPU costs are absorbed completely by us. So all you need is to consider the bill of your API key, right? And you can monitor that really easily from the dashboard. It's on a per token basis. It's significantly cheaper than the main AI hyperscalers, etc. Now, if the question is about Civo, you can manage that from the dashboard yourself, and there'll be information online about that. But you can manage quotas from an administrative perspective of your account. So you can set that in the dashboard and manage it as an admin of your account, really.
Thank you. And then the next one, is there a risk relying on major cloud providers during outages, and what are the alternatives?
Yeah, 100%. I think it starts to open the door and like raise questions around like having an AI market that's so concentrated and so dominated by a select few, right? And that obviously imposes issues when you start to consider downtime, and not only downtime, but things like price increases, service deprecation, etc. But having your tech stack as a company or even a startup completely concentrated by the main AI hyperscalers is obviously quite dangerous. If you get a Cloudflare incident that impacts the service availability of ChatGPT, or if they ramp up the prices, you're kind of locked into that vendor. And I think it opens the door to more of a democratized approach for AI, whereby I think you should kind of like spread your focus around maybe a few players. That could be relaxAI, because kind of like we're not in that select few of the concentrated market. I think the other part of that is traditionally the reason why it was so concentrated was because the closed source community always had significantly more performant models than the open source community. Now, that is no longer the case. And in fact, the gap between, like I touched about in the presentation, the gap between the open source community and closed source is shrinking significantly. You got models like GLM 4.7 coming out, which are rivaling like a Claude Opus. So I think spreading your attention around and away from that concentrated AI market, especially in the US, is something probably important to do, yeah.
Thank you. So there's quite a few questions in the chat. We've got time for maybe one more, if that's okay. think the one I saw up here are what are the options for connections with interfaces with these flows that you showed?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I think kind of I showed that to an extent, right? So the reason why I did it this way was so you can hopefully envisage it connecting to a user interface, right? So when I kind of like opened up the webhook and I said, this URL is completely customizable, you can create a route from whatever kind of like API you're creating. But if you had an API that plugged into your user interface, you could quite easily update your API to call this route and trigger this workflow, and it quite seamlessly integrates to your dashboard or user interface. Yeah, I mean, there's not really much limits, right? So like you could imagine this is a single workflow with a single route, which is triggered by an API call that plugs into your dashboard, say, but you could build out an entire suite of these workflows that trigger from individualized API calls. And so the reason why I made it this way, where you go and click submit in your interest form, and that triggers the workflow through a webhook, is to kind of envisage it plugging into a UI. But yeah, definitely go and explore a bit more. Like n8n is really well documented for doing stuff like that.
Thank you. So unfortunately, we are out of time, but if anyone has any questions or just wants to look up some more information, please feel free to scan those QR codes. Ben, thank you so much for your time. It was a pleasure having you give our webinar today. Thank you so much.